Hello, welcome to Prajim Technologies. I'm Venkat. This is part 9, Comments in C Sharp. In this session, we will learn single line comments, multi-line comments, and we'll also have an introduction to XML documentation comments. There's a great deal to learn about XML documentation comments, which we'll be talking about in a later session. So, what are comments in general? Comments are basically used to document what the program does. For example, if there is a confusing piece of code and if you want other developers to know what that particular piece of code is doing, you can basically comment that lines of code. And when we talk about commenting in C Sharp, there are actually three ways of doing it. You can comment single line using // or you can comment multiple lines using / asterisk and */. Let's look at a demo. Say I have some piece of code like this, console.writeLine, hello, and let's make a copy of this line just to make sure we have some piece of code to comment and uncomment. Now I can comment the single line. So to comment a single line, we use // Obviously, when we run this program, this line will be ignored by the compiler. Okay, so it doesn't compile this piece of line. Okay, so this is a single line comment. But if you want to comment, even this line, you can also put // similarly this line. Okay, but if you want all these three lines to be commented, instead of using // for every line, what you can actually do is use multi-line comments. /*, that's the beginning of the comment, and to end it, asterisk and another // so this entire block is now treated as a comment. Okay, depending on your situation, if you want to comment multiple lines, you can make use of multi-line comments. If you want to comment just a single line, make use of single line comments. Now, do not comment every line in your program. That's not why comments are there. If you feel a particular piece of code is complicated, only then try to comment that. Otherwise, there's no point in actually commenting each and every line of a program. For example, if I have a piece of code like this, let's say string city equals something, maybe London, and we have a check here if city equals maybe London, and we want to maybe say console.writeLine something. Okay, now somebody put a comment here if city is London. There's no need to do this because this code is self-explanatory, so we don't have to comment this line. Okay, so that's what, use comments only if the piece of code that you're trying to you know explain is complicated. If it's straightforward like this, we don't have to comment that. It's just waste of space and time. Okay, and basically there are two ways to comment. One is you can use the designer. For example, if I want to comment this line, I can use the designer here, comment out these selected lines. And if I want to uncomment, you can do the undo uncomment button. Okay, that's using the designer. Another way is to actually use the keyboard shortcut, which is faster and quicker. So, and the keyboard combination for that, if you see the slide, it's Control K, Control C. Control K is common, so Control K and Control C to comment. Uncomment, Control K, Control U. So Control K is common, C for comment, U for uncomment. That's how I remember that, just in case if you're wondering a way to remember them. So Control K, Control C, comment. Okay, and observe the status bar here at the bottom left hand corner. When I press Control K, it says Control K was pressed, waiting for a second key, so Control U now, it will uncomment that. Okay, anyhow, so there are two ways basically to comment and uncomment, using the designer or using the keyboard shortcut. And as I told you, don't try to comment every line of code. Use comments only for blocks or lines of code that are difficult to understand. And we'll look at XML documentation comments. I'll just give you an introduction of what XML documentation comments are, but there's a great deal to learn about them, which we will be doing in a later session. Okay. Now let's say I want to make use of this console class, and the moment I type in the console class, when I hover my mouse, the IntelliSense tells me the summary of this class, basically telling me what this class is capable of doing. So this class, if you look at the IntelliSense there, it represents the standard input, output, and error streams to console application. So where is this information is coming from? Okay, if I right click that and then say go to definition, okay, this is actually coming from the Microsoft Assembly. Okay, this class is compiled and there is present in Microsoft Assembly. So Microsoft has written that class. Similarly, we can also write our own classes. For example, let's write a sample class, and we will be talking about classes in a great detail in a later session. So let's call this public class, maybe sample class, just to give it a meaningful name. Okay, now let's not worry about the inner details of this particular class, what it does. So let me create an instance of this class. So when I say sample class, and look at this, when I hover my mouse over there, it doesn't show me any summary of what this class is capable of doing, because we don't have those XML documentation comments. And the way we can tell what this class is capable of doing is by using the XML documentation comments. And if you go back to our slides, XML documentation comments, they use 3 forward slashes. Okay, so forward slash forward slash forward slash, look at this, it automatically gives us that summary tag. This is a sample class and a sample documentation, just to illustrate. So now if I go ahead and hover my mouse over this class, look at that. That documentation, that summary within those summary tags is actually shown in the IntelliSense. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of what you can do with XML documentation comments. Anyway, as a summary, in C#, there are 3 types of comments: single line comments, multi-line comments, and XML documentation comments. Single line comments if you want to comment a single line, multi-line comments to comment a block of code, and XML documentation comments obviously for documentation purposes. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Hello, welcome to Prajim Technologies. I'm Venkat. This is part 10, if statement in C#. If statement is actually a conditional statement. In C#, there are 2 types of conditional statements: if statement and switch statement. In this session, we'll talk about if statement. In the next module, we'll talk about switch statement. So in this session, we'll be learning about if statement, if else statement, and the difference between double ampersand and its counterpart single ampersand, and the difference between double pipe and a single pipe. Let's look at a demo. Now, to understand the if statement, let's write a simple C# program. I want the user to enter a number, and I want to decide, okay, is the number 1, 2, or 3, using a simple if statement. Okay, so first I need to prompt the user to enter his number, and to do that, console.writeLine. So prompt the user to enter his number. So please enter a number. So the user now will enter a number. We need to read that from the console. So console.readLine, and if you observe, readLine method reads the entered number in the string format. Okay, now once we read the number from the console, we need to assign it to an integer variable, int, let's say user number equals. But however, we will get a compiler error here because readLine returns the number in the string format, but here the data type is integer. So string cannot be implicitly converted to type integer. If you're not sure about what is an implicit and explicit conversion, please refer to my tutorial on data type conversions. So now we need to convert the string format into an integer format. Okay, and to do that, we can use the parse method. So int.parse. So what does this parse method do? It takes the string and converts that to integer. Since we are expecting an integer to be entered by the user, so once we have the user number, we can now compare. So if user number is equal to 1, then we know that it's 1. So we can safely print the message console.writeLine, your number is 1. Your number is 1. So let's analyze how this if block works. Okay, so first it comes here. An if statement will need to have a Boolean expression. Okay, and this expression must evaluate to a true or false. If this expression evaluates to true, then this block of code is executed. Otherwise, it's not. Okay, so if the user has entered 1, so let's go ahead and run this program. So it's asking the user to enter a number. So now if I go ahead and enter 1 and press enter, look at this, your number is 1. Okay, because 1 is equal to 1. This expression has turned to be true, so this line got executed. Okay, let's make this program a slightly bigger one. Okay, so if user number equal to 2 and if user number equal to 3. So if user number is 2, we want to say it's 2. On the other hand, if it's 3, we want to say it's 3. All right, so now let's go ahead and run this. So please enter a number. Now instead of entering 1, 2 or 3, I'm going to enter 10. And if I press enter, look at this, there's no output, it's not telling me anything. Okay, so that's because, look at this, we entered 10. So into user number we have that value 10. Is 10 equal to 1? False. So this is kept. Similarly, 10 is equal to 2, false. This is kept. 10 is equal to 3, false. This is also kept. And after that, we don't have anything. It just terminates the program. So what I want this program to do is, if the user has not entered any number between 1, 2, and 3, if he has entered any other number apart from these 3 numbers, I want a message on the screen saying that your number is not between 1, 2, and 3. So how do we do that? Have another if block. So if user number not equal to 1 and user number not equal to 2 and user number not equal to 3. So basically what we are determining here is that if the user number is not 1, 2 and 3, then we want to print a message saying console.writeLine, your number is not between 1, 2 and 3. Number is not between 1 and 3. Okay, so what's going to happen if somebody enters number 5, all these conditions will become false. It comes here. Okay, is user number 5 not equal to 1? True. 5 not equal to 2? True. 5 not equal to 3? 3. So if all of these conditions, see, in this if block we have multiple Boolean expressions. For this block of code to be executed, all these conditions must be true. Even if one of the conditions is false, then this block of code will not be executed. Okay, so this is a pretty simple program. But then this program is slightly inefficient because look at this. If you look at these conditions, all of them are mutually exclusive. In the sense, if this number is 1, it cannot be 2, it cannot be 3, and it cannot be this. Okay, so in that case, instead of using if, you can make use of else if, because that will make your program much more faster. Because here, even if the number is 1, okay, it checks this condition, 1 is equal to 1, your number is 1, it prints that, but it checks this condition again, it checks this condition again, and it checks these conditions again. Okay, now this is extra processing. This isn't required because if the number is 1, we know that it cannot be 2, it cannot be 3, or any of these conditions, it wouldn't satisfy that. So the same program, we can actually make it slightly efficient by using a variation of if statement. So if, else if. So what's going to happen here? Let's copy that. And finally, you can just say else. So what's going to happen? Now, if this condition is true, then it doesn't bother to do any of these. It will directly come here. So it has saved us some time in terms of processing. So if true, execute this. If this is not true, only then it will come here. And this checks this. And if it is true, then it prints this line and then skips the rest of the instructions. So the name itself says if do this, else if do this. Okay. And obviously, you don't need to have these conditions because if it's not 1, 2, or 3, even without checking the condition, you can just print. There is no need of any condition in else. In fact, you cannot have that. The compiler will raise that as an error. Okay, now if you run the program, it's going to work in the same way, except that it's going to be a little more efficient right now. Let's say, for example, I enter 5, a number is not between 1 and 3. Obviously, 5 is number not between 1 and 3. Okay, so that's a simple, if statement. You can have a simple if statement. You can have if, else if, and an optional else statement as well. And then within the single if statement, you can have multiple conditions as well, separated by ampersands or symbols. Let's say, for example, I ask the user to enter a number. If the number is, 10 or 20, then I want to say your number is 10 or 20. So how do I do that? If user number is equal to 10 or user number is equal to 20. So this is an OR condition. Now if multiple Boolean expressions are separated by OR, then if any one of the conditions is true, then this block of code, the statements that follow the if condition gets executed. So we can say console.writeLine, your number is 10 or 20. Else you can do whatever you want. If the number is 10 or 20, if any of these conditions are satisfied, your number is, this piece of code is executed. Otherwise, this piece of code is executed. Okay. On the other hand, you can also have single pipe symbol. So if you look at this, for AND, you can either use double ampersand or single ampersand. For OR, you can use double pipe symbol or single pipe symbol. So what's the difference between these two? Actually, if it's double pipe, whether if it is double pipe or single pipe, okay, if any one of the conditions is true, then this piece of code is executed. But the difference is if it is double pipe, and if the first condition becomes true, it doesn't bother to check the second condition, because if one of the conditions is true, that's enough for this piece of code to be executed. But whereas if it's a single pipe, even if this condition is true, the compiler, the runtime, will go ahead and check this condition as well. So if it's a single pipe, it checks both the conditions always. But if it's a double pipe, then if the first condition is already true, then it doesn't bother checking the other condition. It checks the second condition only if the first condition is not true. Okay, so obviously double pipe will be much faster in some scenarios where the first condition is true. That's why I always use double pipe. And similarly, double ampersand, the difference between double ampersand and single ampersand. If it's double ampersand, for the piece of code, for example, if I say double ampersand, for this piece of code to be executed, this condition needs to be true and this condition needs to be true. Let's say if this condition is false already, there's no point in checking this condition, because anyway, the runtime will skip executing this because this is already false. So that's what double ampersand does. If this condition is false, it doesn't even bother to check this and goes to the else part. Whereas if it is single ampersand, even if this condition is false, it will check this condition and then goes to here and then goes here. So obviously the single ampersand will check all the conditions, whereas you know the double ampersand will check the next condition only if the first condition is true. So that's why this double ampersand and double pipe symbols are together sometimes called as short circuit operators, because they don't bother to check all the expressions involved in a boolean in an if or an else block all the time. That's why they give us a little performance benefit. So I suggest use double ampersand and double pipe wherever you have to use and or conditions. So we have, to sum up, we have seen the if statement, we have seen how if else statement works, we have also seen the difference between double ampersand and single ampersand, and similarly we have seen the difference between double pipe and single pipe. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.